Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Wait Justin Infosec. My name is Frank Kim and I will be your guest host for today. I'm broadcasting live here from the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically Oakland, California, in my home office, my home studio, if you will. If you could, please turn your attention to the chat and feel free to go ahead and chime in with your location where you are joining us from today. I see people from, so far, various corners of the world. Here in the United States, in Colorado, from London. Hey, shout out there all the way across the pond. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. Hey, we've got a lot of amazing topics to talk about here today that we're going to be sharing with you. Oh, Jacques, I see you're from South Africa. Oh, we've got Michelle from Chicago, another person from London. Amazing. Thank you guys for chiming in here. It's nice to see all of you from different corners of the earth here. Oh, Santosh here from Nepal. Quite a number of people here. We've got people from India as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Very nice to see you here virtually. We've got Klaus from Germany as well. Oh, Turkey, somebody from Turkey joining us, and Spain. I'm actually, side note here, potentially planning a trip over to that part of the world later on this year. Well, just a little bit here in terms of what we're going to be covering. We've got a lot of amazing topics to talk about here. And, I do want to mention in prep a little bit of a teaser here for my main session, my main topic that I'll be talking about, CISO leadership lessons learned. I'm going to go ahead and put up a poll here and asking you, well, hey, what does the CISO spend most of their time doing? And this is interesting because, well, when I started my career, I had no idea. To be honest with you, I didn't even think that I would one day be a CISO, a senior security leader. So when you get a chance, please do go ahead and note your responses, whether it be the CISO spends most of their time doing architecture, compliance, communication, or the other category here. We will talk more about this here in a little bit. But before we get there, we've got some other cool topics to talk about. We're going to be talking a little bit. You'll be hearing about the top cybersecurity trends, the top cybersecurity stories that you should know about. We'll be talking a little bit about various leadership topics. And later on in this session, well, all the rage is now AI, artificial intelligence. ChatGPT, we'll have a session all about that, as well as a little bit of a preview of our 5 most dangerous new attack techniques. And the common thread amongst all of the topics that we're going to be hearing about today is leadership. Is leadership from a security perspective. What does the modern security leader need to be knowledgeable about? What do they actually need to know? And it's interesting. It's not just compliance, and it's not just communication. It's not just your technical security architecture, as we are going to see. There's a lot of topics that to be a successful security leader, whatever your role currently in the organization, well, this is what we're going to be talking about today. And to kick things off, we're going to go ahead and start with a little segment on News Bites by Ashley Barcia, talking about the top cybersecurity stories that you need to know.
And welcome to Wait Justin Infosec's News Bites segment, your source for expert commentary on the most significant cybersecurity news from across the globe. I'm Ashley Barsha here in the Sand Studio. Let's dive into this week's cybersecurity news bites. First up, on Friday, April 7th, Apple released updates addressing 2 actively exploited remote code execution vulnerabilities. One vulnerability attacks Apple's web browser to break in, and the other attacks the kernel to take over. I think I hear an alarm. The vulnerabilities are widespread, affecting Mac, iPad, and iPhone operating systems, as well as Apple's Safari web browser. On April 10th, Apple released updates to backport the fixes to older OS versions. If your alarm isn't going off at this point, I'll recap. Remote code execution at the kernel level. One organization reporting the issue was Amnesty International's Security Lab, suggesting to researchers that the exploits were the work of state-level threat actors. In ransomware news, MSI, a manufacturer of laptops, graphic cards, motherboards, and other computer products, acknowledged it was the victim of a recent cyber attack. The Money Message hacker group claimed responsibility for the attack, posting screenshots claiming to be MSI databases, source code, private keys, and BIOS firmware. MSI is urging users to obtain firmware BIOS updates only from the MSI website directly. Researchers are also cautioning users against downloading custom BIOS firmware. The hacker group is threatening to release the data if demands for a $4 million ransom aren't met. And in other ransomware news, a Rochester, Minnesota public school system announced over the weekend that it was canceling Monday classes for its 42 schools after noticing unusual activity on its network. This prompted a district-wide shutdown of the school systems network, disabling staff and student access to their Google accounts and shutting down the phone systems. Investigations are ongoing, and it is unclear if the school system was compromised, though it comes only a month after the school system fell victim to an attack by the Medusa ransomware group, exposing sensitive student information. School's out for summer. Name that band in the comment section below. And those are your SANS News Bites for this week. For more critical cybersecurity news and commentary from some of the sharpest minds in InfoSec, don't forget to subscribe to the SANS News Bites newsletter, your twice-weekly summary and analysis of the most critical cybersecurity developments at sans.org/newsbites. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Ashley Barsha, hoping to see you again next time.
I fell into leadership role accidentally, and I liked it. So I kind of did research on, okay, where does this lead to? What's the end goal? And the end goal that I'm reaching for is a CISO, so a Chief Information Security Officer. So with that, I looked up what was normally required for CISOs, looked at job descriptions, looked at different blogs that had different recommendations on what it takes to be a successful CISO. And then I came across when the SANS started their management track. I was like, oh, this looked like it lines almost completely to what I was thinking it was. So I said, that's it. So I decided to go down the leadership path and leadership management path. And that's how I got to taking these particular courses. So when I work with people and I mentor them, I ask them, what are you trying to do in the security field? And I always point them back to the roadmaps that SANS has. And I say, these are the classes that they're saying, that you would need for this particular track. So if you don't know what you want to do, then this is a perfect place to start. I have people, because I'm a security expert at my organization, I have people coming to me all the time, what SANS class I want to do. And the first question I ask is, like, what do you want to do? And then when we figure out what they want to do, I point them into the tracks that they have. And then I say, start at the entry and work your way through.
Amazing. Thank you to Ashley for keeping us up to date, those up-to-date news stories. And thank you so much, Janae, for sharing your story and your leadership journey and where you are and where you're headed. And this leads us right into our next topic of conversation here. And we are going to jump straight in to talking a little bit about some CISO leadership lessons learned. Now, from a leadership perspective, one of the things that always comes to mind is this saying that there are three different ways to attain wisdom. Number one is through reflection. which is the noblest. Number 2 is through imitation, which is the easiest. And number 3 is through experience, which is the bitterest. And in this segment here, what I want to share with you today are, well, some of the lessons learned, some of the tips I've learned along the way, either by, well, thinking about situations that I've observed or found myself in, imitating, to be honest, right, the success of other leaders that I've seen in different organizations in the industry. And, well, yes, unfortunately, often, as is often the case, some of that hard-won experiences, some of those hard-fought battles where we have to, yes, learn from that bitter experience. Now, moving on to the next slide here, just a quick introduction. I've been teaching and writing classes with SANS for over 15 years, was the CISO here at SANS for a little bit, and I still lead our cloud security curriculum and our cybersecurity leadership curriculum, of which the content today is a part. I'm also the CISO-in-Residence at a venture capital firm called YL Ventures. If at any point in time you guys want to connect after this session, feel free to go ahead and connect with me on social media, whether that be LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to go ahead and send me a message. Now, turning our attention here back to the topic at hand. When I first started my career many years ago, I was an engineer, a developer, building applications and systems. And I was happy as could be typing away at the keyboard and, to be honest, not talking to many people other than my immediate team. And I had no idea whatsoever what the organization, the business, the company that I was working at, what they did, how they made money. Sure, I knew what industry it was in, but that was probably the extent of things. And as I looked around, happy as I could be typing away at my keyboard, I thought to myself, oh man, my poor manager, he's got a really tough job. I never want to move into a management role, into one of those formal leadership roles. And I'm just happy doing all of my technical work. But as my career progressed, things, well, as Janae kind of mentioned, I maybe accidentally found myself taking on more leadership and management responsibilities. And what I found is that I had to get out of the, well, if you will, a little bit of the old school mindset where I was only thinking about things from a technology perspective, only thinking about things from a cybersecurity perspective, this old school of IT security. And what does this mean? As I progressed and learned some of these hard lessons along the way, I realized that I had to broaden my mindset to think about other areas like regulatory, compliance, legal, privacy, things that affect the organization as a whole. And one of our jobs, our main job as a security leader, is not to implement technical controls. It's not to implement security controls. Sure, that's what we focus on day to day quite often. But our job for any organization that we're at is to manage information risk, to make sure that the organization is aware of the cyber risks that it's facing and, well, think about ways to deal with those risks. Common way we deal with those risks is, of course, to, well, implement various controls, but it's really the focus on the business overall that we've got to keep in mind. And here, what we've got is our cybersecurity leadership pyramid. And at the very bottom, you've got your technical foundation. What differentiates? What separates a cybersecurity leader from a leader in another part of the organization, an HR leader, a finance leader, a leader in a different business unit? Well, of course, a big part of this is the foundational cybersecurity knowledge that you have to have some experience in, some knowledge and skills in terms of being able to build and lead your team in the appropriate way. And as I was busy typing away at my keyboard, heads down, all those years ago, well, I had a hard time understanding, well, what my manager had to deal with, what my manager was working on. And really, as you progress in your career, as you look to take the next step, you need to think about, okay, how do I increase my business knowledge? There is an organization. Maybe some of you have heard of it. If you have heard of this, please feel free to go ahead and chime in the chat. An organization called the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors. Now, there are many like organizations around the world. This one is specifically for North America, but over in Europe, there's an organization called the IOD, the Institute of Directors. Similar thing. And the idea is that these are groups that provide guidance, information to board members, the highest governing body in many organizations. And they've said that, hey, we need to no longer we need to stop treating security like an IT issue and treat it as an enterprise risk management issue. And as you move up, right, this pyramid here from manager to leadership to even more executive levels and interfacing with the CEO, the CFO, the COO, and the board, well, how could you imagine that you would have a successful conversation with them unless you were familiar about the various business aspects that the organization actually cares about? So how do you translate this into an understanding here? On this next slide, we've got the technology risk graph. And the idea here is that over time, the business has invested in various technologies to help meet various business goals. But you know what else is changing? Well, at the same time, as time has gone on, the threat landscape is changing as well. Now, both of these things are doing what? Increasing the operational risk that your organization has to deal with. And from a business perspective, there are numerous investments that the organization has made in terms of the first website, wireless network, mobile applications, investment in cloud computing. And at the end of 2022, we were all hit by the release of the newest version, the latest version of ChatGPT. Now, certainly AI, artificial intelligence, ML, machine learning has been around for years. And well, to be honest, whenever we would hear a cybersecurity vendor, talk a little bit about AI and ML and how their product was built, we probably all, maybe secretly or overtly, rolled our eyes just a little bit. Is this thing actually real? But now, with the release of ChatGPT, Microsoft's Copilot suite of tools, and many other players getting into the space, well, we see that artificial intelligence is perhaps that next wave of computing in relation to natural language processing. This is why you're going to hear a little bit about AI and ChatGPT from Matt Edmondson later on today. So we mentioned this here because you, as a security leader, need to, of course, understand the different investments that your organization has made in the business by adopting various technologies like we see here over the years. And as a result, yes, increasing that operational risk for the organization. But while you've been implementing these various technologies, well, the threat landscape has changed as well. From basic threats back in the day, all the way to, insider threats, activist organized crime, to advanced persistent threats that you will be hearing a little bit about later on as well. Your job as a security leader is to understand that, do you have a widening gap in the upper right-hand corner between your business goals and the threat landscape, and understand that corresponding cyber risk and how to actually deal with it. Now, here on the next slide, in addition, we mentioned what separates a cybersecurity leader from other leaders in the organization. Well, it's that knowledge of the threat landscape, the knowledge of those business investments and where that risk can actually occur. But it's also useful to consider not only what is different, but what can also stay the same. What stays the same across all tiers and levels of leadership is how you lead your team members. Some years ago, I was charged with coming up with a cybersecurity strategic plan. And myself and a couple of trusted colleagues, we put together, to be honest, in retrospect, what was a very good and amazing strategic plan. And we got it approved, we got increased budget, and then we were happy. We had some pretty large increase in budget, and the time came to go back and do the work. So we went back and shared the plan with the team. I'm going to ask you to guess, chime in here in the chat. When we shared that good, accurate, amazing, excellent strategic plan with the team, what was the team's response? Did they jump up and down for joy and say, Frank, thank you so much for getting this increased budget. We are happy to start working on this. Is that what you think they said? Now I'm going to pause here and let you guys chime in here in the chat to see what you think was the outcome of that. But I'm mentioning this here because on the slide, we see the boss, manager, leader table. Now, this table, in my opinion, is at least 50% better than the other tables that you see on the internet. Why? Well, because there's 3 columns in this, whereas most of the tables that I see online only have 2 columns. Yes. And the column that we have added here is the boss column. Now, if you only have a table with two columns, the manager and the leader, it somehow implies that, hey, maybe the manager is somehow lesser than the leader themselves. No, I don't think so. You need both management and leadership skills. But the boss, on the other hand, I think we know that in the modern workforce, right, that, hey, you cannot just have boss characteristics. Now we're going to put up another poll here about asking you, hey, have you ever worked for a micromanager? Now go ahead, put in your answers to the poll if you have ever worked for a micromanager. And I see a number of comments here in the chat when I asked, well, how did people react to that increase in budget and that strategic plan? Daniel says, you know what, that's too much work. Another person says, it's a great plan, but yeah, what are we actually going to do about it? Somebody else mentions, well, we'll put that plan under consideration. And the mistake that I made, to be honest, at that time was that I was treating it a little bit more from a boss perspective, right? That, hey, we came up with this plan and now I was basically telling people, if you will, what to actually do. And this is amazing here. If I glance back at the poll, this is a little bit not totally surprising, but amazing in the sense that 100% of you have said, well, that's down to 83% now. Quite the majority of you have worked for a micromanager. Now, the micromanager is somebody that basically says, hey, I'm going to tell you what to do and you have to do it, period. Now, that was effectively what I was telling my team, right, through my actions. I'll ask you another question. Have you ever heard of this syndrome? A syndrome called the Get Me a Rock Manager. This is something a CIO that I had some years ago mentioned to me, and I didn't know what it was. So I went on Google and looked it up. Well, it was on Google, so I knew, and it came up, and it must be true. Get Me a Rock Manager is that boss that says, hey, Jeremy here, if I could mention you, Jeremy, go ahead, please. Go get me this rock with these mineral composition, these colors, these striations, this size, this weight, and so on. And so you go and do it. And you bring that rock back to the boss. And what does the boss invariably say? The boss says, well, Jeremy, nice try, but that's not what I was asking for, although that was exactly what you were asking for. And the boss gives you some new requirements, and you go out and you get that new rock based on those updated characteristics. And you bring that rock back, and what does the boss say? The boss says, well, Jeremy, that wasn't the rock that I was looking for. And so as you can see here, the boss is a micromanager. How motivated are you to work with that boss going forward? Not very motivated at all, which is why you want to adopt various management and leadership approaches here. Here on the next slide, what is one way to actually do that? There is a great book written by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. And the story that sticks out the most to me in this book is a story about how when she was a manager, she was leading her team, there was somebody on the team who was underperforming and not doing very well, but he was a super nice guy. He would bring cookies and candy and treats to the meeting. Everybody really liked him, but he couldn't do the job. He wasn't performing at all. And she never had the conversation with him about his performance. And time went on. Fast forward a year or two later, well, things happened in the organization and they were undergoing some layoffs, and well, they had to lay him off, and for performance reasons. And when she brought this up, he said, well, why? Why am I getting laid off? And she mentioned his performance, and he looked at her and he said, well, why didn't you ever tell me this? Why didn't you mention this before? I thought we were friends. And this experience led her to write this book, which, as we know from a management perspective, a leadership perspective, everything great in leadership comes in the form of a 4-quadrant grid. So we can see we've got this amazing 4-quadrant grid on the x-axis. If you stay quiet, not mentioning anything, well, that can have ruinous consequences. But on the right-hand side, you could challenge directly, be very direct, be very bold in terms of how you're talking about things. But it needs to be balanced with what is on the y-axis. In the lower left, in the very bottom here, if you don't care and challenge directly, well, you could be seen as a jerk. But if you have a balance of both caring personally and being upfront, direct, challenging directly, this is what Kim Scott refers to as radical candor, right? Javal mentions, hey, ask him what requirements he or she needs to meet to fulfill the role before assuming that you know what they're actually looking for, right? Great point here in terms of getting your team members actually involved in the conversation. Now, how do you go about providing feedback here? Feedback communication is all about, well, both providing and receiving, both the talking and the listening. And if we start over here on the left-hand side, well, we start with the facts, right? We start with the facts. What actually occurred? What is the impact? You listen, and then you talk about your expectations. Now, I'll ask you a rhetorical question, and feel free to chime in here in the chat if you like. Is usually when we're having a tough conversation. And to be honest, I find myself reverting to this. And this is why a lot of times these leadership best practices, these CISO lessons learned are, you might say, Frank, this is common sense. And I would say, yes, I agree. These are common sense. However, it's not always common practice. We've got to remind ourselves, how do we turn some of this common sense into common practice on an everyday basis? And the mistake that many of us make from a management and leadership perspective is by jumping straight to the expectations and starting with the expectations instead of starting with the facts. On the flip side, on the right-hand side, we want to make sure that we are approachable, we listen, we clarify, and we respond to those comments. What is the common word between both of these sides? Of course, yes, it is the listening. Here on the next slide is an example. Let's pretend, let's imagine. Hey, somebody's always late to your weekly team meetings, and you want to correct this. So you go ahead and you start with the conversation. Hey, you're always late. All right, don't be late anymore. That's not the best way to provide that feedback. What's more effective is you start with the facts. 3 weeks in a row, you've been late to our staff meeting. All right, facts. Then you talk about the impact. This means we've got to stop what we're doing and catch you up. And it wastes other people's time and it's disrespectful. Impact. Is there a reason why you haven't been able to get here on time? And then you go ahead and you listen. And it's only after you do these things is then you perhaps talk about some of the corresponding expectations. Now, Angie Morgan points out, when handled effectively, confrontations raise team performance. To manage conflict effectively, you got to recognize that there are 3 sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth. There's a really great book by former FBI hostage negotiator. And after he retired, he wrote this book and said, there was a point in all of the successful hostage negotiations, a common point that if he knew you got to that point, that the conflict would likely be successfully resolved. And this was at the point where he would be talking to the hostage taker. And if he got the hostage taker to agree and say, hey, is this what you want? Is this problem that you're having? Is this what you're thinking about? And the hostage taker said, yes, the listening part here. Right? Once he got to that point, he knew that the conflict would most likely get successfully resolved. And really what we're talking about here is leading change. Now, one of our jobs, I mentioned earlier, that our job in an organization is to manage information risk. I also believe that our job is to lead change in the organization. However, it's to lead change at the rate at which the organization can accept it. Now, Professor B.J. Fogg came up with this very simple but amazing model that clearly summarizes what are the different factors that inform people's behavior. Right? And on the x-axis, we've got your ability, the ability to do something, to do a job. On the y-axis, we've got the corresponding motivation. Now, it very, very well may be that people, broadly speaking, in your company, they are motivated to help the organization stay secure. However, their ability may be low. And if it is too low, well, they could fall below the action line, the so-called action line here that you see in the middle of the graph. The idea here is that you've got to increase both your motivation and the ability for somebody to do something. Let me give you a personal example here. Let's pretend that I've got this personal goal to get in as good of a shape as I can. And I've got this goal to, let's say, do 50 push-ups every day when I wake up in the morning. Well, we've got a problem. I'm maybe not in a physical state to be able to do those 50 push-ups. So while my motivation may be high, my ability might be very low. So what can I do to increase my chances, to improve my behavior? Instead of having a goal of doing 50 push-ups every single day, well, maybe I could do 5. So my motivation is high, my ability, right, increases as well because it's easier to do, getting me past that action line. But there's still a problem. When I wake up in the morning, it's a little bit chilly, I'm tired, body feels a little bit tight. And my phone is right next to me. So instead of getting up and doing those 5 push-ups, I just go ahead and I look at my phone and all of a sudden it's time for me to get ready for work. So instead what I might need is a prompt. What can I do to increase my ability? Maybe I don't have my phone next to me. I put it in a different room to charge. And then maybe I've got some motivational messages that are taped to the wall at the front door, at the bedroom door, that I can see. Prompts to remind us that we need to do certain things. Similarly, people might want to do the appropriate thing from a security perspective, but they need to be reminded, right? They need to be reminded. A lot of times we in security might feel that we need to nag our constituents, but hey, there's nothing wrong with this, because per the model, it's useful to remind people. There is a company that is probably the company that is doing one of the best jobs in the world at trying to get people to do what they want, to have recurring behaviors. And that company is Facebook. Facebook, right? What is their goal? Their goal is to increase activity, engagement on their website, their mobile app, their various properties. And you might be motivated by staying in touch with your friends, keeping up with the latest news, seeing your family photos. Well, so what they want to do is make it as easy for you as possible. The app is available on the web, on mobile, but even with that, they know that they've got to constantly remind you. So they might send you notifications, email reminders, come back and see what your friends are talking about, come back and see your family photos, to all lead to this increased behavior change. And we mentioned this here because for you, if we think back to our cybersecurity leadership pyramid with the executive at the top, leadership, management down below, well, from a strategic communications perspective, as you're thinking about rolling out your plan, you've got your roadmap developed, you've got your multi-year strategic plan that is aligned with various business goals and initiatives. You also need to think about that mistake that I made. Why didn't people want to implement, work on the plan that we had put together? Well, one, they were learning about it for the first time, and they didn't know. They didn't know we had the plan. And so if they don't know, they don't understand your strategic plan, effectively speaking, then, well, you don't have one, because your team is not going to help you implement it. You've got to share your plan over and over and over and over again until you get to a point where, well, they feel like you probably conveyed this a million times. Now, how do we usually encourage our team to communicate about the plan and let people know about it? We talk about it in all hands meetings, in team meetings, in the newsletter. And if you add all of these things up throughout the course of a calendar year, that might be hundreds or thousands of touch points. You might think that seems like a lot. And I'm going to say that is not enough. John Cotter, who is the author of a book called Leading Change that goes through a 7-step process on exactly that. He says, when you're communicating about something, don't just do it in those newsletters, the team meetings, the all hands meetings. Have a goal of maybe your 10 people in your direct reports, 10 people in your team. Have a personal goal where each of them will bring up the strategic plan 3 times per day. And if 10 people are bringing that up 3 times per day, nothing big or serious. It could be something as simple as, hey, well, you've got this idea. Where in the strategic plan is that mentioned? Because then it makes people think, I guess I should go look up the strategic plan. That is 30 times a day, times 5 days a week, 150 times. If you multiply that out, that's many thousands and thousands of interactions. And this is how you slowly, prompting people, get them to change their behavior over time. So in summary, Janae shared with us the cybersecurity leadership journey that she's been on. And sometimes I get this question, hey, Frank, what does it take to be a cybersecurity leader, to be a CISO? And we don't necessarily think it's one topic. We see it as a combination of experiences, reflections on what other people are actually doing, on the successes of others, to become this transformational cybersecurity leader. You've got a combination of course, not only understanding the technology, but understanding how to have a business-aligned strategy and building an appropriate risk-aware and security-aware culture that is sustaining, a sustainable culture. But it's also about your operational security executive understanding how to build a vulnerability management program, understanding how to implement effective and appropriate controls, and understanding how to build your security operations capabilities. If you would like to learn more, right, about these various topics, we have a free Cybersecurity Leadership Summit, our annual leadership summit that is happening this year, May 25th, completely free, entirely online. And the agenda is going to be published very soon, where we've got a lot of amazing talks that are going to be happening. Again, completely free, completely online. We will be talking about topics to help you on your security leadership journey. With that, right, I just want to also mention here that the types of things that we've been talking about are part of the cybersecurity leadership curriculum here at SANS. We've got a couple courses that I'm the author of in the upper left-hand corner. Management 512, our Leadership Essentials for Managers class. 514, class all about security, strategic planning, and leadership, and a whole slew of other classes, as you can see here, that are also related to the triads that we just talked about. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close here this segment of the session today. Again, if you want to stay in touch, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, social media. Feel free to send me a message at any time. And now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be transitioning here. And you're going to hear a little bit about ChatGPT. We were talking earlier about the evolution of both the technology landscape and the threat landscape. Where we are today, a top of mind topic here is, of course, artificial intelligence. And up next, we've got Matt Edmondson to share a little bit about what he's been doing with ChatGPT and open source intelligence.
So I remember these holidays this past year of just kind of seeing more and more people start to talk about, oh, ChatGPT, and kind of some fun little examples, right? Like, oh, write a poem about this, oh, do something about this. And I thought like, wow, that's, kind of interesting, but I didn't really play around with it too much right at that time. But shortly thereafter, as I started playing around with it a little bit more, you realize like, okay, this isn't just a fun novelty. Like, this is absolutely insane as far as some of the things that it can do to help out. And I started incorporating them more and more into the workflow of things that I was doing on basically a daily basis. And recently I did a webinar with SANS on ChatGPT for OSINT. And the whole reason I did that was I was in a OSINT Discord channel. And I saw someone say like, well, yeah, I'm not really using, GPT for OSINT at all. And a couple people agree. And I'm thinking, really, because I'm using this thing every single day. And I set up the webinar that I did when I kind of organized and wrote it in a very, very particular manner. And the manner that I set it up as, I said, hey, here's the intelligence cycle, just very, very briefly, right? It wasn't a talk on the intelligence cycle, but I said, here's how ChatGPT is helping me in every single phase of that. And the reason that I actually set that up and did it that way was because I figured that way I know how I'm using it, right? I'm using it every single day, a lot of times to help me write code that I then just need to modify and tweak instead of create from scratch is a big one that I've been doing. And I thought if I kind of spread it out over the entire cycle, then it would just kind of resonate with more people, right? It's like, oh yeah, something maybe, okay, that doesn't necessarily apply to what I do on a regular basis, but this over here, it totally does. And like I said, it is absolutely not a novelty. It is unbelievably productive, some of the things you can do. I personally think the most undervalued portion of ChatGPT and similar in its capabilities. I'm being kind of generic at this point of saying ChatGPT when we're talking about these machine learning AI sites and tools that are out there, the same way I would describe any, little cardboard tube with a little cotton swab on each end, right? I would describe that as a Q-tip, whether or not it was actually made by the Q-tip brand. I seen some of the things that it's capable of, but like I said, I think the most underrated aspect of it right now is summarizing data. We in my SANS Sec 497 OSINT class, I have a few extra labs kind of hidden in the VM. And I've got one bonus lab. It's not one of the regular labs that we do, but it's about kind of basically analyzing chats from the Conti ransomware actor group. And if you've ever looked at that chat data that leaked out of there, it's all in Russian, it's in JSON, right? And so kind of step by step on how we can analyze that. I can now take that JSON data, dump it into ChatGPT, right? Only a portion of it, unfortunately, because it's in the main website. It kind of only handles a little bit of data at a time. There are ways to get it to do larger data, but I can dump that data in there. And not only can it translate, right? We have lots of things that can translate for us, but it can summarize. Hey, this person was talking about this person was talking about this. That's incredibly powerful, right? And I think with a lot of these things, you start looking about, things like stable diffusion and some of the some of these tools out there that actually generate images, and it's easy to think like, oh, this is not going to be good for artists, right? And so I think a similar people have, like, hey, this is going to change the workforce. It is. But I think it's important to focus on and try to accentuate basically the positives, right? It's not, I don't want it to take, I think the purpose of automation isn't to take people's jobs. It's to let people focus on the things that they enjoy more, right? Human beings like don't necessarily want to, okay, let me like translate all of these using like an engine like Google Translate. Okay, let me parse the JSON and get this into a format. Okay, now let me read through. Let me try to, if we can take this data and just in processing, right? My entire career, I've always heard about collection and analysis, but kind of that middle step of processing is really not talked about too much, right? I have this raw data. How do I actually get this in a format where I'm able to analyze it? And the things that I see ChatGPT and some of these other tools out there do to assist in that is ridiculous. OpenAI has a piece of software out there called Whisper. And I can take Whisper, I can give it video or audio, and it will actually transcribe the text in there. It's not just English. It has dozens and dozens of languages that it supports. It's completely for free. And you can even use it offline. Right? I actually tested that a couple of weeks ago. It's a blog post that I haven't written up yet, where I got it set up on a little Nook, and then I yanked the Ethernet cord, and it was still transcribing and even translating video files, the audio from it, in different languages. That's amazing capability, right? For transcribing audios, for basically, think about this. One of the workflows that I laid out at the end of the webinar, you have ChatGPT to help you code together all this information. And then we can also use the same capability to analyze this information and summarize what it found. So if this at all sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend you go check out this webinar. It was a lot of fun. And I knew when I was doing this webinar that I was basically going to take up the entire hour speaking. And so I encouraged everyone to write the questions down anyway. And then I promised that I would capture them and actually answer those questions that weekend in a blog post. So that ended up happening too. But always, if you have any questions, hit me up. But like I said, I would definitely check out that webinar. I think it was a lot of fun to do. And I had a lot of really, really good feedback on that, on seeing the power of, like I said, ChatGPT. And I referred to them jokingly as some of its cousins, right? Some of these other tools in its space, how it can help us make sock puppets, how it can help us make believable pictures of fake people that don't really exist, right? How it can do all of these different things. So check it out. If you have any questions, hit me up, and I know you'll enjoy it.
Take the A out of APT, the advanced out of the advanced persistent threat. Join me Monday, April 7/15 at 7:15 p.m. Central Time for my live stream from Sands Pentest Austin and my keynote. And we're going to talk through some real life scenarios, as well as give you an opportunity here to look at some of the significant breaches we've seen over time, where realistically, the attackers weren't very advanced or even that persistent. They were more like just a T, just simply a threat. The great case study on this is that Equifax breach, where the bad guys were in for months after the public exploit code and the patch was already available. And frankly, they waited or even took a long time, multiple months, before they even exploited this. So not very persistent, not very advanced. We see time and time again that even the true APT, maybe the Russian threat actors or whomever, are using techniques, tools, exploits that have been around for years, multiple years. We see this time and time again where these unpatched systems are being exploited by the real threat actors. There's no reason for a real APT to tip their hand with a brand new advanced exploit if the old stuff simply just works. We have an example in the presentation with a very simple AV bypass by finding another tool that does the exact same thing as our good old Netcat. Use that to transfer files. The gift that keeps on giving, good old passwords. Right? We see time and time again. Right? We keep adding all of these this new technology, this additional software to kick the bad guys out, prevent them from getting in, but then the same crap passwords. We see this time and time again. I've been doing penetration testing for well over a decade now. My team at Red Siege, we've been working as a team for over 5 years, and passwords worked then, and unfortunately, they still work far too often today. Still, the gift that keeps on giving, the evergreen of passwords. I'm going to talk through a scenario where a friend of mine, someone I know from online, just simply wrote some blog posts on how to reverse engineer some webcam software. I was trying to figure out how to do that. I had never done IoT type hacking before that rather. And I wanted to learn. It literally followed step by step the techniques and the process that somebody else used. Nothing original on my part. Found a high value bug that got me multiple thousands of dollars just by following somebody else. Literally a hack by numbers from somebody else's blog post ended up getting me a bunch of money. So it doesn't always have to be these super high tech, brand new 0 days. Even if you're new to the industry, or maybe you've switched over from IT to security, there's still a lot of opportunity. In fact, that perspective that you have might be the piece the rest of us need. You aren't, for lack of better words, polluted with the traditional ideas, the concepts, the techniques here to attack or break these systems. And you might find a brand new or an ingenious way to do some of these things. And we'll talk through how it broke the Amazon app for a major sports outlet, to get it to stream on my Apple TV, doing the simplest, dumbest thing possible, quite frankly, by accident, because it just worked. So we're going to talk through a lot of these different scenarios. Again, a fun, engaging, light talk. This is my keynote talk from SANS Pentest Austin. Again, this is going to be April 17th, Monday, April 17th at 7:15 p.m. It's going to be streamed on live with attendees also in person. So feel free to join us live or in person. And I really do hope to see you there. I'm Tim Medine, Senior SANS Instructor, author of SEC 560, Enterprise Penetration Testing, and CEO of Red Siege. I'm looking forward to meeting you on Monday night.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for that information on ChatGPT. Thank you so much, Tim, for that information on threats. And let's go ahead and summarize what we've talked about so far today. And really, I want to highlight 3 things. Is number 1, as a security leader, we need to keep in mind, what do you need to stay abreast of? Of course, yes, you need to stay abreast of the threat landscape. And this is exactly what we started off this segment talking about. Ashley shared with you some of the latest here in terms of the top cybersecurity stories. And specifically, she called out some examples of malware, some examples of ransomware. And why is that a big deal? Because, well, 1, you not only need to stay in touch with the threat landscape that is going across the world, across all industries, affecting many organizations. But number 2, you as a cybersecurity leader also need to understand how this impacts your business. And what is impacting your business? The changes in technology, the evolution of technology. Still, many organizations, even though cloud computing has been around for a long time now, over a decade, many, many years, organizations are still at varying points. Some are still early in their cloud migration journey, which introduces various risks. Organizations today, large enterprises, are all multi-cloud by choice or by chance. By choice, because they've purposely decided to adopt multiple cloud providers, or by chance, via acquisition, by nature of geography, different business units, and so on. This makes it hard for security teams like yourselves to secure the cloud, because now you need to be familiar with numerous cloud providers, understand their differences and their similarities, and make sure that your teams have the appropriate skills. But what else is changing the business landscape? And we're at the very early days of this, is, yes, AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, how that's going to change the workflows that you have today, how that's going to create new opportunities for your business overall. But what else is going to stay consistent? If number one is the threat landscape, number two is the business landscape, number three, well, yes, are those core, timeless, common sense, but not always common practice, leadership lessons learned. We talked about a few tips and tricks and some suggestions here in the main session, but those are the types of things that I would suggest, hey, you go back and think about. Well, what are the one or two, maybe three leadership management competencies that you want to improve upon? And it might be something that you're already familiar with, but yes, again, constantly reminding yourself, how do you turn that into common practice? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to close out this session by talking next about, well, a preview of the 5 most dangerous new attack techniques. Hey, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, everybody. Thank you so much. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and we're going to go ahead and close out the show here with, yes, those 5 dangerous new attack techniques. Thank you very much.
These are the people that I look to, and so many of us look to give us insights on what to expect next, what we should focus on in keeping cyberspace secure.
Like Ed said, when we know something, we want to share it with you. So that's what we're here to do. I'm going to talk to you about 2 different new attack techniques that I think everyone needs to be paying attention to. Let's dive right in here.
The first attack, and it's really difficult to figure out which attacks are the most compelling or the most dangerous. But I've been tracking them very closely, as I always do.
What excites me always about security is how things change. And we're doing these panels now in one form or another for about the last 10 years. Now, each year there's something new, something exciting really here to talk about.